you'd like to read along with me, 1 Kings 18. 1 Kings 18. This may be a familiar story to you, it may not be. 1 Kings 18:21. If you found 1 Kings, now you can find verse 21. Chapter 18, verse 21, all right? Now I'll give you the context. I'm not going to read everything that's surrounding this, but if you are familiar with a man named Elijah, he was the most famous Old Testament prophet, if you don't know. Him and Elisha were the most two prominent Old Testament prophets. Elisha was his predecessor, who succeeded him. But Elijah was, when Jesus transformed on the Mount of Transfiguration, it was Elijah who met with him, all right, Moses. So Elijah is one of those special people in the Old Testament. All right, Elijah had, and y'all farmers may appreciate this, but he had prayed that it not rain on the earth, and it had not rained at this time for a space of 3.5 years. To say the least, he was not popular. Now, if I walked up to you, Brother Larry, and I said, I'm going to start praying as your pastor right now, that there's not a stitch of rain fall on your land, and it don't rain on it for 3.5 years, am I going to be popular with you anymore? And that's what Elijah did. He come to Ahab, the king of Israel. He told Ahab that he was going to pray that it not rain. And it didn't rain. Not only did it not rain, but it didn't dew for the space of 3.5 year stretch. Now, when I was going to seminary, there was a man who was raised around here who surrendered the ministry sometime around 1951. And he told me that he believed that he was responsible for the 1950 drought that hit Navarre County. And I thought, well, it might have been more than you around here, because from 1950 to 1957, there was a drought where it almost didn't rain at all for 7 years here. But it started, some people say it started in 1947, but by record it started in 1950. In 1950, he felt the Lord called him the ministry. And at that time, him and his father was in the cotton farming business together. And he didn't want to leave the cotton farming business, nor did he want to leave the cow business, and he didn't want to go to seminary. He had just graduated not many years before that from Texas A&M. And so he didn't want to go back to school, and he was starting a new family, and he'd already bought a new car. And so he made up all these excuses to God why he could not friend the ministry. And so he was planting cotton. He planted cotton somewhere between around Richland Creek over there. It's probably underwater where it was right now because it's under the lake. And he said that he looked at the crop, and they looked at the crop sometime in early July. They did a survey, and he had the banker come and do a survey because he borrowed money against the crop come July. By the estimation, if y'all don't know nothing about cotton, because when he told me this story originally, I didn't know nothing about cotton. I didn't know the difference between cotton making a bale an acre or 100 bales an acre. I found out later it will never make 100 bales an acre. But they did an estimation, and he borrowed money against what they believed was that cotton was going to make when they looked at it in July. And they did an estimation of it making 2 bales an acre, which is a bumper crop. I discovered in cotton, right? A bumper crop. They thought they were going to have a bumper crop. This was 1949, 1950, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so he went to the bank, he signed the loan, borrowed the money against the crop, and bring it in. He said the west wind started blowing hot west wind, and it blew, 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 and it blew all the way on into September. And his his 2 bales of cotton crop turned into a half a bale an acre by the time September rolled around. And God finally convinced him that he might want to listen to him. And he surrendered the ministry and he went off to school. But apparently it was more than him, because y'all stayed 6 more years in drought after 1950. It was the most severe drought that hit Texas. That drought is probably responsible for more lakes in Texas than any other thing, if y'all don't know about it. Some of y'all were live back then, right? Y'all can tell me about it, first-hand knowledge. I'm just going by, I wasn't born then. I wasn't born until 16 years later, so I had to read about it in a book or listen to old men tell about it. I heard other people talk about how their fathers cut limbs out of mesquite trees and fed the cattle mesquite leaves off the tree during that time. And they wasn't nothing to eat around here. And so I tell you all that because this is the same condition that the land is in when Ahab is the king over Israel. Matter of fact, when this event happens and what Elijah says to him in the nation of Israel, he says to him, as Ahab and one of his prophets, seer, he talks into going out, and they were going to go try to find enough food to try to save some of the animals they had alive. The drought was that severe at that time. 3.5 years without any rain puts a pretty good crink in all crops, okay? All storehouses are pretty well diminished by that time. And so they were going out and trying to find a water source or any type of food for their animals to try to save some alive. And in the same time frame they're hunting them, Elijah shows up because he had been on the run for, he went and hid himself for 3.5 years space because they had threatened to kill him. He was very unpopular because he made the announcement that I'm going to pray that it not rain. And then it didn't rain, and it didn't rain, and it didn't rain. And God went and hid him out in places because Ahab, the king of Israel, hunted for him. And they couldn't find him. And finally he shows back up after 3.5 years. God told him that he was going to let it rain after 3.5 years. And so Elijah came back. He came back to the people. And he's going to challenge the people to make a decision, to make a choice, to choose. This is what he says in verse 21. Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt thou between 2 opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Okay? Now, if you don't understand, why did Elijah pray that it not rain? Why did God give him the ability of praying that it not rain? It not rained for 3.5 years. I'll tell you a few of the backdrops. Part of the backdrop is that the nation of Israel had become very wicked in its leadership. Ahab, his wife, Jezebel. Y'all don't name your daughter that. Okay, no Jezebel. All right? No Jezebel. All right? Yeah. Ahab and Jezebel is reported to be the 2 wickedest people that ever sat on the throne of a nation. All right? She put the prophets of God to death. She gave command, and he gave command along with her. Anybody that spoke in the name of God was to be killed. And this is the condition of the people and of the land and of the nation. As Americans, I think it's only fitting, and on Independence Day we take a long, hard look at ourselves as Americans. America in some cases, come together on a few occasions to be in agreement. They came together when they first formed this nation. 13 original states voted in their state legislatures to ratify the Declaration of Independence and later on the Constitution. They agreed on the precepts and ideals of what the Declaration of Independence said. That to live a free people of God-given rights. They recognize that God is supreme creator of all things. Go read the Declaration of Independence, and you'll understand that they believe rights came from heaven, not from government. They believe that man was endowed with certain inalienable rights from his Creator. Now I want y'all to listen to that. And listen to the speech of American in power today. We have drifted a long way away. You all don't know. Long way away. The nation of Israel had drifted long and far. It had started some years before. Actually, the nation of Israel had its own civil war, if y'all don't know. But instead of being decided by conflict, God said, it's in my hands, and y'all let me do what I want. So they didn't actually have a civil war, though they were at odds from then on out. The nation of Israel was divided in two at this time. You had a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, if you don't know. Ahab was the king of the northern tribes at this time, of the northern nation, because it was, like I said, divided in half. Elijah was going to give a choice to them to make a decision, and he expected them to make a decision that day. He asked them how long are they going to have this division between two opinions about who God was. And as an American, I will tell you this: America is just as much as divided as it's ever been today. There have been individuals that predicted another civil war, by the way, based on either Supreme Court decisions, or based on elections, or based on different ideals about which way we ought to go. But we're kind of on a precipice, so we don't know which direction we're going. Which way to choose as Americans? Now, I think I know which side Elijah wanted people to come out on, right? You know, but the people had for themselves had to choose for themselves. A free people, a people that get to make their own choice about things. One of the problems that you may not understand many ways is that when America became a free people, we have made some terrible, terrible decisions being free people. If y'all don't know that. Years ago, I read a book. It talked about freedom. And as an American, I love being in a free people, a free society, right? I mean, I don't like the ideal of a government intruding on my ability to choose who God is. And if y'all don't know anything about history, is that wasn't always the case with all those forefathers that came to this country. Because in other countries, and I will tell you in Texas, if y'all don't know Texas history, in Texas, to get married in Texas in 1823, you know what you had to be? To own land in 1823 in Texas, you know what you had to be? Any of y'all guess? Yeah. You had to be a Catholic. Before Texas independence, before it gained its independence from Mexico, before Texas became a state, for sure. To be married in Texas, you had to go through, you had to convert to Catholicism to get married. You had to convert to Catholicism to own land, to get a land grant. There's an interesting fact, if y'all ever studied there's some famous people who died in a little old mission at the Alamo, right? One of those people, to get land in Texas, he converted to being a Catholic to get a land grant. Didn't do him no good because he died in the Alamo, but he did. I had my suspicions it didn't do him any good eternally either. Okay? My point is that we don't understand what freedom is because we've had it so long. None of us have really, now I will speak for most of us, have never endured what it means for other people to make decisions about everything about our lives. We've enjoyed freedom the whole time I've been born on this earth. But it's changing. And it's changing rapidly. I read an article yesterday where a street preacher was arrested for disturbing the peace because he is preaching in an open air park. And they accused him of violating some ordinance for the city of Seattle. And they sent 8 police officers at him. If y'all don't know nothing about Seattle, they're letting rogue individuals burn down the city, but they're arresting Christian people for speaking the truth and holding the Bible. Things are turned on their head, if y'all don't know. In that age and time, in the nation of Israel, things had got perverse, to say the least. And Jezebel had all those individuals who she disagreed with put to death. If they spoke a word against anything they did audibly, she just silenced them. And if y'all don't know, that those who preach tolerance today about everything are most intolerant people you'll ever meet. Just for the record. And so Elijah presses the nation about choosing today. Because we live in a free society. I used to kid around. We have the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast. Right? Hold up. Welcomes everybody coming. What we need on the West Coast is the Statue of Responsibility. Because we're not responsible with the liberty we have. The freedoms we enjoy. Do you really, and I'll dab into some stuff that happened this week. Do you really believe those individuals who signed the Declaration of Independence and later signed the Constitution, do you really believe they ever intended to protect certain rights? Doing so, they believe were God-given, that we invented. If y'all don't know, this week they overturned a decision called Roe versus Wade, finally, after 49 years, almost as long as I've been alive, that invented the right that I assure you, none of those men, certainly none of those men that died in the Revolution, ever thought about they were going to protect somebody's right to kill their unborn child. Because that's what they invented in 1972. That's what they said the Constitution said in 1972. Do you really think our forefathers who wrote the Declaration of Independence, go read it one day, who believed that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, do you really believe that they intended that we'd have a right to kill an unborn child? No. I want you to think about that a second, because Elijah presses the nation of Israel to choose. To choose, on the purposes of choice, to choose where they stand. Choose which side to stand on. I realize some people like to stand in the middle, right? They like to play both sides against each other. And if y'all don't understand it, that's really most of our news systems today are standing in the middle, trying to play off each other. That's why they get ratings, if y'all don't know. We live in a society which people really need to choose. Is God God? If God is God, you have to accept the fact that what are His precepts? Because this is important, because Ahab and Jezebel, they had no regard for human life, if y'all don't know. She put to death everybody that disagreed with her. Okay? Not only that, her husband tried to buy his neighbor's farm. Now, y'all will appreciate this in the age when we are now going to let corporations take over private property to put in a train that don't exist yet, right? Y'all might appreciate this because people think that might is right. It don't make it always so, but that's what she thought. Her husband wanted a piece of property from his neighbor. He had this vineyard, and he wanted that vineyard. And the man that owned the property refused to sell him the property. And so he come back salty because he didn't get what he wanted. He couldn't have everything he desired. And so his wife just gave instruction, just have the man killed. And we'll just take his property. And that's what they did. That's who they were. But they had a whole nation following them. They had a whole people going down their same path. And Elijah challenged the nation to choose who they are. Choose where you stand. Choose which side you're on. You may not like choosing. Most people don't, right? Because if I don't have to make a choice, guess what? I have put it off. I haven't been pressed. I hadn't had to take a stand, make a decision. But Elijah presses them to that day they were going to be faced with making a decision about who God is. Now, he had a showdown, if y'all don't know the story. He gathered up all the prophets of Baal. There were 450 of them. He was the only one on God's side. And they were going to have a showdown on Mount Carmel. That's where this took place. And then whichever God answered by fire, that was going to be God. And then after God answered by fire, He let it rain. And Elijah thought he had won. It wasn't the case, but he believed, all of us think sometimes that we make people change their mind when they don't. All y'all can shake my hand when you leave, and I don't know better whether you agree with me or not. You can smile, do anything. Elijah really believed that he had won. God in heaven answered by fire. Everybody there that day saw it. Do you know how many minds he changed? Now, I'll tell you the rest of Paul Harvey, the rest of the story about these two characters, if you don't know. There's a man, his name was R.E. Lee, I think. Somewhere in there. He toured the country for about 50 years, preached one sermon most of the time. One sermon. Now, I figured that'd be pretty easy, right? If I only had to remember how to preach one sermon, I might be able to do that well. Amen? And so he preached this sermon estimated over 1,200 times to over 1 million people estimated over that course of time. And the name of the sermon was Payday Sunday, because I have some news for you. Ahab and Jezebel got what coming to them one day. And I assure you, America is not going to be immune from her decisions. They will not be immune from her decisions. In the last 49 years, America lawfully put to death babies by the millions. Millions. And said it was a lawful right. I want you to think about what the Declaration of Independence says about where rights come from. Because what they were saying, it was a God-given right. That the God of heaven blessed them making those decisions. And I want you to think about what that means. I realize you may have a different view about different things, but I can assure you one thing. If God is nothing else, He is consistent. God loves human life. All human life. When God called Jeremiah in the ministry, God told Jeremiah that He knew him when he was in the womb. He knew who he was. He knew everything about him. He knew him from the time of conception to the time that he was born. He knew him prior to all those things. Yet it's unfortunate today we make God something He is not. We have embraced ideals that are foreign concepts to who God is. And what Elijah says, how long are you going to halt between two opinions? After 49 years, they went a different way. It took them 49 years to make a decision. Not based on what many of you might say is wrong. But I want you to think about who we are as Americans, especially on Independence Day. That's tomorrow, right? Who we are as Americans. Y'all understand how we're free? My forefathers went and died on battlefields. I could be a free man. As a child of God, my Savior went and died on a tree that I could be a free person. You disgrace their memory by attributing to them certain freedoms. You need to understand that. For a freedom to be God-given, it has to be in line with the will of God. I want you to consider that. And Elijah pressed them to make a decision about where they stand. Which side do you stand on? Because, listen, there was only one God. Elijah knew that. Baal did not exist. They had invented him for their own concepts, their own ideals, their own pleasures. What they wanted to do, they just renamed something. Y'all don't understand that ideal. Today we live in that same kind of world. People are just inventing the God they want to worship. Or no God at all. How long will you halt between two opinions? Which one is right? Let's all stand together.